I'm David Liggett with Data Center Hawk. This is Hawk Podcast number 14, and I'm here with the one and only Mike Netzer. Mike, good morning.
Good morning, David.
And we are talking about all things data centers on this podcast. So glad you're with us wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to Hawk Podcast number 14. I'm David Liggett. This is Mike Netzer.
President accounted for.
And we're glad to have you with us wherever you are joining us from. We are here in Dallas, Texas, the great city, the cooled off city this morning.
It's a little rainy.
It is a little rainy.
Came in fierce at about 6
That's right, which brought a fantastic temperature change to the area, which I think we're all thankful for. So I'm good with that. Today is the 5-year anniversary of Data Center Hawk.
I believe that is the copper anniversary, but I have to check my notes again.
I'll be getting something copper
I got you
today.
Still.
Yeah, but anyway, so we've been rolling for 5 years, which is obviously, it's awesome and super excited about it. I was reading today that, there's some interesting stats about how companies, startups at certain points, exit out because they either run out of money or whatever might be, but we're here, we've made it. So it's really fun to get to 5 years. And I would just say to all those that are listening that have been a part of this, our customers, obviously team members, the naysayers out there.
Sure.
We appreciate it. Come on.
If you were a betting man, which we established last week that you're not, but if you were, you would have bet that you would failed. Just based on the statistics.
Sure.
95% or 90+% of businesses fail within 5 years.
Sure.
So this is a testament to you, David, and your leadership and your force of will to get this thing to where we're at today. So
let's go.
We're excited. We're going to have a special Ask DCH later, talk about what 5 years ago today looked like.
Very good.
What led to the decision to start Data Center Hawk. So
I love it. That's
looking
good.
forward to that.
Yeah, and this is a fun week too. Just as I mentioned, fall is upon us. Fall is mine. Do you have a favorite time of year?
I think it's fall.
Fall. Mine
I'm
too.
I have a Bob Sturm of philosophy that's 65 to 67 degrees is the perfect temperature.
Yes.
Short sleeves.
Yes.
Shorts. Long sleeve shirt.
Yes. Yep.
Perfect temperature.
Yeah, I agree. And this is, for those of you that know Dallas, it can be warm in the summer. We've had, at the very beginning of the summer to the middle, it's pretty mild, but, certainly in the last few weeks we've been slapped with the
Yeah, we had to pay the hot tax.
Yes, we live in Texas. But it's football season time. So do you have a favorite sport? We haven't even talked about it.
Yeah, to watch football.
Football.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so my wife went to Florida State.
Okay.
And so last weekend was the unofficial week 0 college football kickoff. Okay. Miami versus UF, Florida, both of whom are rivals.
Yes.
And so
she wanted them both to lose.
Yeah, it was some type of draw or rain out or, kind of everybody falls out injured at the same time. No, it was anyways, that was a fun one to watch.
Love it. You bet. And, so college football starting this week. NFL starts. I think we should, not only when you celebrate the NFL season starting, one of the greatest things about it is that the preseason is ending.
Yeah,
because
mercifully.
It's awful.
It gets worse every year.
It does. It's amazing they keep it rolling, but I guess it's a moneymaker. So, but yeah, college football starts this week. Fantasy football is beginning as well.
And a pre-condolence to anybody who drafted Andrew Luck with a high draft pick.
That's rough. Yeah, that's rough, man.
Moment of silence.
What was your take on his retirement, by the way?
In my position,
yes,
it seems like it'd be hard to walk away from $140 million.
Well, yeah, and his owner said he walked away really from $500 million.
Yeah, and so, but I think when you're in pain,
man,
nothing else matters.
Yeah.
I have a friend of mine who's been dealing with some chronic back pain, and we talked over the weekend. I think he would have done anything.
Yeah, sure.
You could not name a price high enough to get rid of that pain. And so I think when that's what you're staring at, it's, to each his own. Yes,
and I don't think the generic football fan recognizes how hard it is to rehab through that stuff and actually get back to the point where you can actually play. That was one of the things I was thinking about. It's he's done that for 3 or 4. I think he's had 3 or 4 significant injuries. Maybe
he's really dealt with a lot.
Yeah, but you go through a year of getting back anyway. It's a challenge, but it is football starting this week, so we're excited about that. But excited about the podcast today. Mike, what is on tap for podcast number 14?
Yep. So we've got, last week we had part 1 of our 4-part series on just some of the different challenges people in the industry face. And last week was the end user and
Yes,
talking
sir.
about, you've got to have a plan. And when you get punched in the mouth, you got to still be able to execute the plan.
Mike Tyson.
Can't bring it back to Mike Tyson enough. So today we're going to be talking about the operator and some of the different challenges they face as far as, winning business, delivering on business once it's won. Obviously, next week we talk about consultant/broker and some of the roles they play.
Yep.
And then the fourth one is going to be the investment group,
Yeah.
as we've seen a lot of investment money flow into that that space over the last couple of years. So in addition to that, we got a couple over-unders.
Yes.
I think you're going to enjoy. We've got a couple of role plays. We've got a new segment, which I will not say, but I will just surprise you with it when it comes out.
Okay, can't
And then
wait.
a very special Ask DCH when you just talk about, hey, what did the founding of this company look like?
Yeah.
So, looking forward to it today. So let's jump in.
Love it.
All right. So first thing is, like you said, the challenges that the data center operator
Yes.
faces. And so, we talked a little bit about this last week about from a pricing standpoint about it's a moving target
Yes.
and there's a lot of disruption
Yep.
in pricing. So
Yep.
talk a little bit more about, across, there's anywhere from a quarter cabinet buyer
Yep.
to a 20 megawatt buyer. So
Sure.
that's a very wide range. So
Yeah.
let's talk about through the different types of buyers and what an operator has to do to meet their needs.
Yeah, certainly. So when I started in the space, the terminology that we used a lot at the time was, retail colocation and wholesale colocation, and if you're in the industry, and you're doing this work every day, you have some, I would say, preconceived thoughts around what sizes of transactions or what sizes of IT infrastructure fit into those categories. It's more than a size. There's different things that these different groups have pushed providers to be, but really, what I wanted to do today from a challenge standpoint is talk about, as a data center operator, 3 basically different tiers of groups and what challenges they present for the operator. And this comes from really, 10 to 15 years of being in the space, seeing data center operators change what they're building, seeing them work through the challenges of what they're doing today versus where they were 3, 5, 10 years ago. The other thing I would just mention very quickly about this is, this is a game around capital deployment.
Yeah.
How much money do we have? Where are we putting that money, and when do we put it in these places? And so, the way data center operators did that, even 3 years ago was much different than they're doing it today. And we'll talk a little bit about that, as we go through each group. So what I want to do is I want to break down these 3 groups, retail, colocation, from a data center operator standpoint, 0 to 250 kW, that type of range of IT infrastructure. Wholesale colocation, 250 kW to 2 megawatts, and then hyperscale opportunities, which in this situation we're saying are 2 megawatts and higher. Now, some big companies would say, hey, hyperscale deals for us or hyperscale opportunities are like 20 megawatts and above. Some would say they're 1 to 4 megawatts, but that's how we're going to break it up.
Sure.
That's the
And
plan.
so, and when you're going through this, if you would just say maybe a typical customer in each segment,
Okay.
like, hey, Sears,
Yeah.
for example, where would they fall?
Sure.
So if you would.
Yeah, you bet. So basically, think about, we'll attack the retail colocation segment first, and I want to talk about upfront challenges before the customers are acquired, and then post-customer acquisition challenges. So I want to just identify one in each zone, and talk about how data center operators are doing this today. And this is really any small to medium-sized business. We've also seen very large companies have network nodes that they'll place in smaller deployments across multiple markets. But traditionally these are one cabinet, 5, 10, 20 cabinet infrastructure deployments in different data center operators. So in different data center facilities. If you're a data center operator and you're trying to get these type of customers within your data center, one of the challenges that at least we've seen companies really face is, how much time, energy, and effort do you deploy to land some of these smaller customers? when, these, a one cabinet customer from a sales perspective can take just as long as, a 10, 20 megawatt opportunity. Very different size, very different scale, et cetera. So that's one of the challenges I think a lot of data center operators face when they're trying to do, if it's a company that, is a technology company but just needs one or two cabinets in this location, or if it's a retail company that has had their infrastructure within their own building and they want to get it out into a more professional environment. So that's certainly one of the challenges we've seen on the upfront perspective from a retail side of things. Yep. On the back end, I think one of the challenges when you have 1,000 customers, it's really hard to understand what all their needs are and then how to grow them moving forward. One of the things that is certainly true about our space is when you choose a data center operator to partner with, they're going to be your customer for a long time. We talked about this, I think, last week during the one of our segments. But so you really have to choose a data center operator as a user, one that you'll be with for a long time. And from an operator perspective, you've got to figure out, hey, how can I help this business grow? Because you're probably your best customer set moving forward. So that's really it from the retail side of things. Again, the upfront challenge, how much time do we put into these smaller customers? And it's one of the reasons you're seeing these groups depend on, channel sales to be part of that discussion, online platforms to be part of that discussion, as well as the post-customer acquisition challenge, which is really how do we get to know this wide variety of customers and how can we grow moving forward?
Yeah, so they're going to want to build a platform that can meet the needs of those wide varieties.
Yeah, certainly.
Whether that's, we've seen a lot of companies promote, their management system. So how quickly you can access, you can go online, you can see quickly server status, throughput, et cetera, et cetera.
That is a great point, and that's a great point. The data center operator community has spent a lot of time to figure out, number one, how can we make it easier for our customers to buy, which is not, it's not uncommon. I mean, you see this in other industries as well. It's just really hard to do in the infrastructure space when it's not cloud, when it's colocation. But I think they're really focused on that, and especially with smaller users, because there are so many, how do we take that process, make it more efficient, and do the things we need to do to grow their businesses the way they need to. Okay, so let's move on to the wholesale side of things. So from a size standpoint, what I'm suggesting is that this category is really 250 kW to 2 megawatts. I get it right now. Some people might say it's bigger than that. Some people might say it's smaller. But this is really, what we've seen as far as challenges for data center operators chasing these type of opportunities. One on the upfront challenges is these opportunities have somewhat changed over the last 5 years. So one of the reasons I was talking about from a demand perspective, we were talking about this yesterday, but if you look at, data center transactional opportunities on kind of a line with the small here and the biggest here, where that took place over the last, I would say, 5 years was really in, this range. And what's happened is the bigger transactions have grown, so the size has gotten bigger, and these in the middle have kind of pushed the demand to smaller and bigger. So a traditional 1 megawatt deal 5 years ago might now be 500 kW. And part of that is feeding some of these bigger opportunities that are going to these, Northern Virginia, Chicago, Dallas, Phoenix, Northern California, European markets as well. So I think that's a lot of the growth that we've seen. So one of the challenges is like when you have an enterprise user with great credit that has a 1 megawatt opportunity, we've really seen the pricing get very aggressive, and people really want those type of opportunities within their data center facility and portfolio because they're so unique today. So that's been one of the biggest deals is like finding the opportunities. Where are they? How have they changed? And how can we win them? On the post-customer acquisition challenge for this, I think, in my opinion, there's two. One is how do we evolve from a service perspective to continue to meet the needs of the customer? All these customers, one of the things that people don't realize for the data center operator is that their customers are changing constantly. I mean, they're buying, they're acquiring other companies, they're utilizing new technologies, they're phasing out old hardware. I mean, there's just all these things that are happening that the data center operator who provided the infrastructure a year ago, now the need is different, and so their challenge is how do we really evolve and move forward to create something that the end user would want on a long-term basis. And the other thing that we're starting to see is, these companies start to renew their infrastructure, and that certainly has changed. I think their approach to the market, the user approach to the market, has changed because of the way technology has been modified over the last number of years, and their business needs have changed as well. So those are some of the acquisition or the post-customer acquisition challenges that wholesale data center operators have. Companies that are really trying to go after those enterprise user deals between 250 kW and 2 megawatts. And then when you think about the hyperscale side of things, again, from a size perspective, 2 megawatts and larger, and this has been part of the business that has really changed the data center industry over the last 3 years. And it's one that actually, when we started 5 years ago, I certainly didn't anticipate how much growth would come from these companies. I think we all could make the assumptive bet that that companies would be growing in larger scale, but not to the scale that they have grown. And so some of the things that we have seen the data center operator community be challenged with from a hyperscale standpoint is really understanding the end user. There's, in my opinion, there's 3 things that the hyperscale user has pursued over the last 3 years from a needs perspective. One is timing. How quickly can the infrastructure be delivered? That's highly valuable. 2 is flexibility. So how flexible is the solution, and how flexible are the lease terms and deal terms around the agreement? And the third thing is scalability. So how do they actually grow on a long-term perspective? But in my opinion, there's always like 1 or 2 issues that cause those opportunities to end up in one market versus the other with one provider or another provider. And I think if I'm the data center operator that's going after those opportunities, one of my biggest challenges is how do I understand what those 1 or 2 things are? Because those are the things that really change where these things go. And they're such big opportunities that you've got to know what those things are.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we've talked about is the guessing game.
Yes.
That produces. And so, we've seen companies that said, hey, we're gonna sit on land until we hopefully,
Certainly.
Best case scenario, sign a deal.
Sure.
For a company that says, hey, we'll come in and
yes,
partner with you,
Yep.
build the building, we're gonna be the sole tenant in
Yep.
it, et cetera.
Yep.
Some companies have built like a powered shell.
Yep.
And said, hey, we can deploy a lot quicker, but there's a capital
Yep.
cost there. And then we've had some say, hey, we're gonna even put some additional infrastructure inside the building and say, and really try and anticipate the needs of the buyer.
Yes.
And so that's a very difficult place for a company to be in because it's capital allocation and operational, constraints.
Yeah.
So,
and you're taking bets on where you think people are going to go, and that's and these are not smaller. These are huge opportunities.
Yeah.
So, and we certainly have seen, in my opinion, I think the data center operator community has gotten this a lot more right than they've gotten it wrong. They have certainly invested in areas where these companies want to go, and you've seen that as one of the reasons that literally like the Northern Virginia multi-tenant data center market is up over 1,000 megawatts of power. It's the reason that areas like Phoenix has so much planned power, and that's planned. So that's not being built today, but that's, providers that are positioning themselves to say, hey, when the need comes here, we're ready.
Yeah.
We've got the infrastructure ready. We've got the fiber ready. We're ready to go. And another challenge that they have on the upfront side is competing against basically customer self-performance. So all the customers they're doing the large opportunities with, these are customers that have done this themselves, but value the capital of the data center operator, their ability to build it and deliver it quickly, all those things that the data center operator provides them, that's what they value. So, one of the post-acquisition customer acquisition challenges for operators when it comes to deals like this really has to do with delivery. and the question is, can you meet the timelines that these large customers have? And so it's one of the big reasons we've seen the data center operator community focus on supply chain efficiency, and they've done a great job at being able to go, hey, not only can we build this, but we can build it in the timeline that's needed for these companies. And in my opinion, they've shown, I'm sure some of these companies that we can probably build it faster than the companies can themselves, and that's been a big value add from a data center operator perspective. So those are my challenges. Listen, if you're an operator that falls into one of these categories, there's other challenges as well. But I think these are very fluid to where the market is today, and it'll be interesting to see how those play out in the future.
Yeah, great thoughts, David. As usual, we'll put these in a blog. We'll put them in a nice, easily digestible format, shareable, etc. So those will be in the show notes. Look for those. Thank you very much, David. Okay, now we've got some data center industry over/under. So quickly, we'll give you the category. We'll give you the over/under. You tell me. We'll give you the metric, the line. You tell me over/under.
Can't wait.
Okay, so one of the things we've seen is, a shift of focus, let's call it, towards non-North American markets.
Yeah, sure.
And so, if you kind of look at, this is somewhat ballpark, but you say, hey, if you look at the top publicly traded REITs, they've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 to 80% of their global footprint is in North America.
Sure.
And so, but again, obviously wanting to be where their customers are. A lot of them are making changes or are making moves in Europe. So you look at like QTS bought those two sites in Amsterdam market, and so they're looking to move or to grow their European footprint. So here's the over/under.
Okay.
Is if we say that today, again, some subset of publicly traded REITs have 75% of their global footprint in North America.
Yep.
Fast forward 5 years, the over/under is that ratio over or under 67%.
God, I'm gonna go under.
You're going to go take the under.
And I think
tell us a little bit about why.
So certainly North America has been the most mature data center market. There's a number of reasons for that. But, we're seeing significant growth in the European markets, as well as things in markets in Asia, et cetera. And so as those markets become more mature, that's where some of the pain is for larger customers. And so that's why, you mentioned one of the companies, there's probably 4 or 5 more that have really focused their efforts on growing in those markets over the next 2 to 4 years. So I don't think it's an indictment on things in the U.S. slowing down. I think it really shows that some of the same services and business opportunities that are happening in the U.S. are going to be happening in Europe as well, and that will and I would say Europe's traditionally a couple of years behind the U.S. and then other markets are maybe 3 or 4 years behind the U.S. So I just think that's where you're going to see a lot of activity in the next few years. And so I think you'll see those data center operators really look to provide a more diverse portfolio from a geographic perspective. And what it comes down to is that this is a global business. If you want to serve your customers well, they've got challenges not only in the U.S. but in other places as well.
Great. So you're not saying that necessarily construction is going to slow in North America, but that European and APAC growth is going to certainly outpace it to some extent. All right. Next one is, so one of the things, we were talking to a data center operator in the last month and kind of talked about, hey, maybe we've overbuilt some of these tier 4 type facilities and have really jumped through a lot of hoops and invested a lot of money to get a tier 4 rating or a tier 3 plus rating. And so if you're going to build a new data center today, and it's in the most generic way possible, where you try and attack all 3 segments you just talked about, retail, wholesale, hyperscale, you're building the most flexible you can.
Yep.
Call it a redundancy rating.
Yeah, sure.
And so you have like N+1, 2N, 2+1, 2+2, that you would say, here's the over-under. You're going to build a data center today, over-under of 1.5 N of redundancy. Okay. So where are you building and why?
Yeah. I would go under. I'd say N+1 at the UPS, at the generator level, both on the the electrical side and the mechanical side. And I think that's what you're seeing across the board. I think generally the market's gotten comfortable with that. Listen, there's some customers that have to have 2N redundancy based off of compliance standards, et cetera. There's some that could do more N-type redundancy for the certain applications that they're working with. But at the end of the day, I think N+1 is where you want to be. And, I think that's in any markets that you see. It's one thing's on the pricing perspective, too. I'll just mention this. We certainly have seen pricing become more compressed over the last 10 years in the space. But it's really important to remember that like what's being built today is not the same as being built, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago. And so some of these, especially on some of the build-to-suits that are out there, I mean, they're very customized. Some are like stripped down to very sophisticated users that are doing things with these facilities that most of the general data center user public can't do. And so some of the pricing around that is different because of those needs. So just, again, it's really important to remember what you're building, it has to be factored in when looking at pricing. But I think N+1 is the standard.
Okay. And have a bonus.
Oh, gosh.
A bonus over under, non-data center related.
Oh.
What is, this is Dallas Cowboys win total for 2019. The over under is 8.5.
Oh, I am going to go over.
Okay.
I actually think that, assuming that Zeke Elliott, gets set up and signed again, I think that they will be. I think they have a good team. Okay. I think the defense is starting to round out into shape. I think, the offense will be looking good. So they certainly have shown up in the preseason, which really means nothing. But again, I think it's over 8.5.
You heard it here.
We shall see.
All right, great segment, great thoughts, David.
Yes,
all right,
bet.
Next we got a little bit of role play going on.
Amazing.
So one of the things we've seen in the data center market, and this is teasing week 4 here.
Yep.
A lot of interest from the investment community.
Yes.
As as an asset class, they've really they've done well over the past few years. There's been some ups and downs from an individual company standpoint, but generally there's been a lot of growth, and so that attracts more investment dollars. So you are an investor. You've got $50 million. You've done your work. You've raised some capital. And so how do you evaluate, as a data center investor, how do you evaluate which companies are positioned well for growth beyond just the balance sheet?
Yeah. I would be looking at, where these companies are positioned from a geographic standpoint. Are they in markets traditionally that attract, especially if you're going after larger users? I would be looking at, their ability to grow in one market versus another, their access to capital. I'd be looking at their leadership. I mean, these are all things that, probably pretty reasonable approaches, but those were the things that I would be looking at. How well positioned are they to globally attract business? These would all be the things that I would be focused on. And I mean, there's definitely like tangible things you want to look at, but I think there's some intangibles too that have proved to be pretty consistent over the last 5 to 10 years. And so those would be the things I'd be focused on.
Okay. All right. Role play number 2. You are a data center CEO, Chief Executive Officer, and you've got $200 million in expansion capital.
Wow.
Right. So you've got a presence right now. You've got Northern Virginia, Silicon Valley, Chicago, New York is your North American footprint. And so you've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 megawatts each in those 4 markets.
Yeah.
So you got $200 million. With $200 million in expansion capital, what market do you build in and why?
Yeah, that's good. I think, I feel like if you're in these markets already and you have a customer base, obviously there's a lot of value there. A lot of these customers want to grow in the market they're in. They want to grow with the providers that they have relationships with. So, in that scenario, I think I would focus on Silicon Valley. That's a market that we've seen somewhat supply constrained just because of general market characteristics out there. Anyone that's from California, I think, would probably be like shaking their head, yes, like I know what you're talking about. Real estate expenses are extremely high and probably only getting higher. And then I think Northern Virginia as well. I mean, we've seen such a strong growth trajectory in Northern Virginia for the last 3 to 5 years, and it has had a couple of like blips, but that more has to do with we talked about this digestion period we're in with some of the larger users that are out there. But I think if you're in that market already, you want to have the runway there to continue to grow. So those would be the markets that I would focus on with that capital, because I think at the end of the day, that's where the bigger opportunities are.
Yeah, and then tying back to, what we talked about earlier about the different kind of customer segments, how would you build? Would it be, just talk about a little bit more on, would it be 10, 10, 10, 10 from a megawatt standpoint, or would it be, 20, 5, 5, 5? How would you break it out?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we've seen groups do it differently. I mean, I think I would be building anywhere between, depending on the market, anywhere between 4 to 6 megawatt chunks, bringing that online. And that obviously has to do with access to capital and all those different discussions. But that's how I would be phasing it in. I think that's, healthy because what it lets you do is it lets you attract the enterprise user business, which we talked about a second ago, that wholesale type business. But it also lets you, show a larger user how you could scale up over time. And, a lot of times I think it's important to recognize those companies that come in, while they might need a lot of power over time, it's gonna scale up over time. And so just your ability to walk them through that ramp process is really important.
Okay. Great thoughts. Great role play. All right. Next, we have a new segment. We're calling it Hyperscale Corner. Until we come up with a better name.
I love it.
Or the megawatt segment, or the meg seg.
The meg seg.
We're gonna coin it, which may be the meg seg, which may we end up. I was trying to line up a sponsor for this segment. Do you remember Hypercolor T-shirts? If you're a child of the '80s, like I am, that was a really big deal. It was a status symbol. If I can find one, I will definitely wear one, and we'll blow on it and let it turn from blue to pink. Anyway, so again, a ton of the industry is really focused on this hyperscale user, and we talk about just the amount of attention and really leasing that they do.
Sure.
So, I went back and looked at the interview you did with Tad Greason, who is QTS's chief hyperscale officer.
That's right.
So if anybody knows about this stuff, it's him. So he had a couple thoughts of, there's really 4 to 5 buyers that could take down 20, 30, 40 megawatts at a time, right? We know who they are. But he said, they're really focused on a list of 30 customers who they would define as hyperscale, and who would say they may buy 1 to 3 megawatts at a time, and then over a period of several years become, 15, 16, 18, megawatt customer, and really would kind of fall into that hyperscale bucket. I talk about the different things that they need, scale, speed of delivery, the right economics, the right location, great things. So, if you would just talk about, who are those, companies in that 6 to 30 range who are buying 1 to 2 megawatts at a time, but over a number of years. What are their characteristics? How are they buying? What types of things are they considering when looking for a co-location partner?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, they've got some of the same characteristics that really big buyers would have, but they're just, I would say on a smaller level. So I think they value flexibility for sure. They value the ability to customize the solution and make the solution work for them. They value, and let me go back to the flexibility thing. I think they value contract flexibility. I mean, that's the hardest thing that a lot of these companies themselves, as well as data center operators, have to work through, is the flexibility around contracting and what that really looks like. And then I think they, it's typically like smaller cloud providers or technology companies that still have pretty significant technology platform. But I think they have a strategy in their head. These users have a strategy in their head, and they're wanting to make sure that the partners that they partner with can help them achieve this strategy. Some of that is from a global standpoint, like I'm in the U.S. today, but can I grow globally? And it's these companies have to make a decision, not just the best decision that would meet their needs today, but the anticipated needs of tomorrow, and how to am I with someone that can help me meet both? And that's where I think these companies focus.
Okay. So we're going to continue this segment as each week, trying to take a different cut at this hyperscale group and really trying to understand them a little bit better and kind of share the things we've learned over the years.
And we should. It's such a big part of the industry, so it makes a lot of sense.
Awesome. All right, for this last segment, it's a special Ask DCH. So as we mentioned at the top, this is our 5th anniversary.
That's right.
And more specifically, your 5th anniversary, because 5 years ago today, there was how many employees? 1. All right, so I just want to talk through, hey, what did that look like?
Fantastic.
And even before that, how did you come to the point of starting a company? Talk about some of the business principles or guiding principles you've learned and have tried to infuse in the company over the years. a couple of the things you've seen, changes in the market and how it's covered over the last 5 years, and then what do you see going forward?
Yeah, that's good.
So talk a little bit about, hey, what did August 27th, 2014 look like for David Liggett, 5 years ago today?
Yes. Well, first of all, my third grader was starting school that day, which was funny because we talked about how, it was a big first day for both of us. But I think, literally, so if I think about that day, the unknown can be scary, but it can also be exciting. And so at some point you've got to, when you start a company, anybody starts a company, and it doesn't matter if it's like a technology company or a retail store or whatever, but I think you've got to be okay with like failing. And you got to be okay with having an idea and standing by it and going, hey, this is my idea, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And I'm the person. And so that it falls back on. And so I think that was, the day really marks something for me as far as just getting comfortable with that. They say when you start a business, you get to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And so that's one of the things that this process has done for me. Has just been awesome to, recognize that you swing the bat and you hit the ball and you swing and you miss. And so, but anyway, yeah, it was just me day one. We had a group that was helping us from a development perspective, and then we built our team around that. But yeah, it was, literally a business plan, me, the capital needed to do it, and, my kind of rough idea of what our website would look like. And, then it was day one, and the team that, we met with, the basic idea was, hey, I'm bringing my best, you bring yours, and let's get after it. And, somehow we're here 5 years later.
There we are.
Yeah.
And growing. So yeah, that's awesome. So talk about, some of the things that you've used as just kind of guiding principles, just from either a business/life standpoint.
Sure.
For us, and specifically for you, those are pretty well married.
Yeah, you bet.
So just talk about, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, you bet. I think the first thing, I've got, things that kind of like resonate in my head, but I think the first thing for me is just, being someone that can operate with humility and learning how to like dial down the inner pride. There's a lot of people that are like, I think, hey, I'm humble, we're humble, or we want to pursue that or this or that. But actually doing it is a different process. It's a day-to-day process. And, the cool thing about the business world is it can slap you around a little bit. It can slap you around a lot. And so I think for me, there's been things that we've done that we've been successful at. There's been things that we've done that we failed at. And that's just always a good guide for me to remember that, like, we're just doing our best every day. One of the things that I've tried to do when we hired people here is I've just, we just don't tolerate ego. And it's all stuff that we have to, like, all of us, we have to, we all have it. And so it's how do we, what's kind of our belief system that's going to either put us up on a pedestal or others up on a pedestal. And so that's what I have tried to do. And, certainly recognize that I fail and have to own my part and go back. And I think I've probably asked for, forgiveness at some point for everybody on this team multiple times just for things. But I think just trying to have an organization that's based around humility, something that I've wanted to do. I've tried to do, we have to work hard, and that's like, I think like, hey, we're 5 years in, but we're still hustling, and it's, everybody wants to show how great their thing is. Everybody wants to promote how, awesome their organization is or whatever, and how, they're killing it. And I think we've talked about before. The reality is, like, every day you have to show up and get after it. And when you start something, you get to be the head guy. You also get to be the low guy on the totem pole. And so that's something that has been great. But we got to be hungry and get after it. We also have to have people that like work well with one another. And I think that's been something has been a big part for me, is just people that can interact well, that are smart, not just from a general task perspective and what they do, but also from just a people side of things. And then, it's like, we talked about football season starting, but I love the idea of, in order for a football play to work successfully, there are 1,000 things that have to go well. and you only see the guy that runs for the touchdown, but you don't see the block that the third lineman made after he cleared the line of scrimmage and got to the linebackers. You don't see all the things that it takes place to do. So there's all these little victories you have to get to a bigger victory. And that's something that I've recognized when you do something like this is like, the macro vision is huge, right? We are trying from a data center perspective to change the way people search and get information in the space so they can make better decisions. That's what we set out to do. I was in a situation before where it was very hard to do that. So I said, hey, let's try and make this easier for people. And it just takes 1,000 little victories to get to the big victories that you're trying to achieve. So I think those are some of the things that have guided me, and trying to go. I've always wanted our, business and our company to be a place that people like to come to work. So we do a lot of fun stuff. We invest time in some, things that we're not necessarily developing code at that moment or, researching what's happening in Chicago or whatever it is. I mean, we're focused on team building to make sure that it's people actually enjoy being at work. You work with people as much as you spend time with your family. So, generally, I want people around here that we like to be around and enjoy being around. And, so those are some things that have guided me.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear kind of that background and guiding principles. Again, as an employee of Data Center Hawk, it's exciting to be on the journey with you and excited for many more years.
Yep.
All right, so strictly from a business standpoint, let's talk about where the data center information market was 5 years ago versus where you think it is today. And again, that's one of the challenges we're trying to solve. So we're a little bit biased there, but just talk about the changes there you've seen over the last 5 years.
Sure. I mean, one of the things we fight for every day is mindset. I mean, we're trying to help people think the same way that we do. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of confusing. So 5 years ago it was very confusing. I mean, people would compare numbers one to another. They would hear something and try to understand what's happening. And so, so part of it is you try to reduce the confusion in a way that the market can handle. And so, a lot of times we spend, as a just perfect example, just how the market thinks about power. This is if you're in the commercial real estate space and you're listening to this, traditionally, you think about real estate in the, idea from a square footage perspective, but this is a totally different, metric that we're tracking from a power side of things. Now, all that goes into square footage, all that goes into real estate, but how we track it is very differently. So I would say we certainly have made, I think as an industry, we have definitely improved. And, and I'm proud, I'm just thinking about this, but, I'm certainly proud that we've been a part of that. I'm certainly not suggesting we're the only ones, but I think we've worked really hard to help people think a certain way so that they can make decisions faster. And all of this goes back to the fact that every single human participates in our industry. In some form or fashion. This is the industry that is supporting what's happening, on a day-to-day basis from a business standpoint, from a family at home perspective, from this podcast and what we're doing with this is all technology and all of this goes back somewhere to a data center facility. And so that's what we're trying to help, from a business standpoint, that industry works smoother. So, I think just from in my perspective, I think we've one of the challenges was just the confusion in the industry, and hopefully we've done some things to make that better.
Awesome. Okay, so looking forward, where do you see the market going? And not necessarily from a growth standpoint, but just from a, the characteristics of the market. So we talk about some of the differences between the data center market and the office leasing market as far as, what percentage of deals are brokered, for example. That's a very specific thing. But you just talk generally about, hey, what do you see the next 5 years holding? If you fast forward 5 years, where are we just from a information standpoint, from a nature of the market standpoint?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things that quickly comes to mind is that the data center user is becoming more mature. They're getting smarter. Their infrastructure plans are getting more complex. And so I think that's going to push a lot of growth opportunities for data center operators, consultants, investors in the space. And a great example is that hey, 4 years ago, we talked about this in the hyperscale corner, which I think was the name of the segment.
Megseg.
Excuse me.
Just call it by his name.
But you know, that part of the industry didn't exist like that 4 or 5 years ago. So, you know, if you think about that, you go, gosh, well, in 4 or 5 years, the market can change like that. So I think as the user gets more mature, they're going to push the operators to do different things. And one of the biggest things I think that's coming is the re-architecturing of data center user networks and how important that is to the underlying business efficiency of these companies. And so that's why you hear a lot about edge computing. You hear a lot about, you know, how some of these technologies will feed into that. I just think at the end of the day, the maturity of the users pushing all that, and, you know, how these companies want to utilize their infrastructure to make their business more efficient. So I think that's what it's going to center around. As that user gets more mature, what are their needs, and how can the greater industry help them with their needs? And in that, there's opportunities for everybody in the space. You know, there's opportunity for the provider community to grow their portfolios to meet those needs. There's opportunities for the users to have a more efficient IT infrastructure that will drive better business. There's opportunity for investors, right? We talked about, I mean, there's a lot of capital interested in the data center space today, whereas 4 or 5 years ago, you know, they weren't. And so that's an opportunity. So I think, you know, if I summed it up, I would say there are, you know, the future is bright for the space. I mean, and, you know, people are going to win and win big if they keep listening to what the end user wants and figure out ways to serve them.
Yeah. Hey, well, thanks for sharing your thoughts on where you've been, what the last 5 years looked like. Again, we're all excited for Data Center Hawk to continue to move and grow and track this market. So, again, special Ask DCH segment today.
Yeah, you bet. And so I just, in closing, want to thank all that have been involved. I know we said it at the beginning, but I'm going to say it at the end. You know, if you're, you know, we have just some incredible customers that we get to serve. And so certainly thankful for them and how they've helped shape what we're doing today. And so, you know, first of all, once again, thank you. If you, you know, enjoy our content, you know, like it, share it, comment on it. You know, we do Ask DCH. So, you know, you can certainly suggest comments and things like that to us, because we would love to make sure that we get to that. But again, a special Hawk podcast number 14 on this 5th anniversary of Data Center Hawk. Thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.